Last Real Filmmaker Q&A, August 17th, 12 p.m. Central, with Jenni-Juulia Wallinheimo-Heimonen, Director of Alternative Way of Being Human, and Morgan Tipping, Director of Casual Terms.
Earlier talking about how to finance disability arts. So as you're like starting art school for people with intellectual disabilities, how do you get paid, or do you have funding or salary for your work?
So in the UK, there's no state funding. I've lived in other contexts. In Slovenia, you used to get state-funded artists. There's no state funding. We have a model called the Arts Council England, and you can apply, with an idea. If you're an artist, you can apply with an idea to release money for a project that way. It's very, very competitive. There have been some criticisms about how equitable, how fair and how transparent that system is, and they're having an overhaul. And individuals can apply, but also organizations can apply. So the Alternative Art School, which gave birth to the film Casual Terms that's in this festival, was an Arts Council England funded project. The Wellcome Trust, which is another funding body, put some money in as well, and the National Trust, which is an organisation where you have big, well, not always big, but you have sites of historic interest up and down the country. So 3 organisations pooling resources, and then calling out for artists to apply with an idea of what they might do with that money in that space. In this case, it was a historic workhouse. So it was a very progressive commission. It was I had a lot of freedom, and I had a lot of freedom to work in the way that was right for the context, with 2 children's homes, with, up to about 200 completely different individuals, amazing individuals from 8 years old up to 80 years old. So it's quite a patchwork, I think, an artist's career. And in my case, it's very central to the work that I consider how to use all the resources, time, the money, the materials, the opportunity, in the most, in a way that sort of benefits the context in the maximum way. So I paid myself the same fee, the same salary as a support worker. So it left a lot of money to actually go into all of the sites and for the work that, people wanted to make.
Morgan, I have a question about that. Have you found that the artistic products of your participants have generated some income into the program?
So in this country, there's a lot of the participants for children, young adults, and in relation to the adults, they'll be on disability benefit. So to be remunerated financially would interfere with that system. But in terms of thinking about resources and materials that would endure, stay with them beyond the project, beyond me, was really important. And I advocated for and secured a permanent artist residency spot for, at the moment, one person who really shone out as a really skilled painter, who'd never had access to any kind of space to paint in before or materials. So I think carefully about the whole context and the individual, and work with the individual and the context therein to reach some plans about what would be helpful and impactful beyond my presence. Yeah.
That's real interesting. And we in America are familiar with the concept that sometimes people with disabilities get trapped into the public assistance system and actually discouraged from making an income, no matter how good they're. So I would have a question for both of you, Jenni-Juulia and Morgan, is so what kind of got you into taking your work and creating these films? What was the inspiration that you wanted to have a cinematic record and story about this? And maybe Jenni-Juulia, you want to start with that?
Yes, actually, I call my film more like an artist statement. I had a need for to visualize what I'm doing in my work, and then I decided to combine like a text artist statement with the images of my previous works from around past 5 years, and when I was screenwriting it, there was quite a lot of like symbolism between the works which have separate text actually in exhibition context, but then they are all talking about people with inborn disabilities and how we are sort of not having a voice in the society the same way than people who are so-called survivors or who have more interesting dramatic stories to tell to the big audience. And I was actually quite surprised how much interest this film got, because I haven't like showed those works together, as I often make just one mobility aid sculpture and exhibit separately on the street in an event or in a seminar or just on a marketplace, and just each work each time. And then when I put them all together, so I got a lot of like feedback from people that they would like to see a full exhibition with all those gadgets and aids together. But it was made for like this kind of applying funding context to show in a tight package of what my works is about.
How about you, Morgan? What inspired you to do a cinematic story?
Yeah, so I spent a year getting to know the residents of 2 children's homes and Nottingham MenCap, which is a day centre for adults who identify as learning disabled. And I got to know them, about close to 200 people. I got to know them because I won an opportunity to do some creative work at a historic workhouse, which is essentially a historic large warehouse where people who were reliant on poor law relief in the past. So in this case, this was a workhouse that was built in the 18th century, and that institution, that big building, came about because the old system of giving relief to poor people from, say, the medieval period, by the time England started to industrialise, councils, local organisations decided it was too expensive to keep giving out to people who were essentially starving and out of work. So they decided to club together and build these big warehouses to save themselves money and to disincentivize people from being poor, which is obviously a ridiculous idea and a ridiculous system. So I knew from the start that the work I would do with the people involved would be looking at the history of how, for example, social care in the UK started, because these workhouses, these big warehouses, which were about putting people off from being poor, which is obviously, completely misses the point about all the structural inequalities that create poverty. I knew that would be one thing that would be something we'd look at in the work. And the other aspect of what I wanted to look at is how these big warehouses also created our school system, and how the people that I was working with and getting to know with during this project had very different experiences of schooling, often not very positive, often reflecting back that many improvements needed to be made, often reflecting back that services generally aren't personalized enough. So I guess the film, which came right at the end of working for a whole year with very, very different people, with very different communication styles, with very different movement styles, with very different sensory kind of impulses and needs, this very sort of deep collaborative work together helped me understand their experiences, and therefore how their experiences today relate to the past. So the film, I guess, is partly a sort of me honouring the time we spent together and the sharing of those experiences, and trying to make a communication bridge. Many of the people that I worked with communicate through Makaton, through sign language, maybe in very, very subtle ways. I worked with children who communicate through, looking in a certain direction and eye capture technology. So I wanted to make a strong communication to audiences who don't know their experiences, and honour that and treasure that, and also make a film that spoke about and educated people on a very dark history, and how actually that dark history overshadows how we relate to people today. So it's emotional, political, and sort of structural, really. It's a call for change.
I'm going to sort of take off from your, and again, redirect some questions. But what I'm hearing you say is that for you, this film you've made is also about public awareness of larger issues surrounding people with disabilities, and using art as advocacy. I'm not sure if this has been totally explained, but Cinema Touching Disability is a program of the Coalition of Texans with Disabilities, which is primarily an advocacy organization. And we try to change public policy and public attitudes, to make the world maybe a little better place. So I'm going to sort of redirect over to you, Jenni-Juulia. Do you see, art as advocacy from your point of view as well?
Well, I can at least talk from Finland that it's very much advocacy. People are tired to read the official. They are tired to read papers that the disability organizations are writing. They are tired about news about political issues. The problem here is that on a paper, Finland is one of the most excellent places for people with disabilities. If you have a severe disability, you have a subjective right to, for example, transportation and to translation services. You get free assistive devices, you get personal assistance, you even get home conversion. But in reality, the municipal authorities think that disability benefits are too high and we get too expensive to society. So you don't automatically get everything that is said on the law that belongs to you. So you have to know your rights, because nobody tells you what you can get in this country. After severe injury is very common that people have years struggling with the bureaucracy. And also we have very strong attitudes here that personally I would like to I would like to make most works to change doctors' attitudes towards disability in Finland, because the social model is still not very well understood here. Yeah. And your services depend a lot on the attitudes of the medical people around you. And families with disabilities name the bureaucracy as one of the most burdensome thing in their everyday life. So there's a lot of paperwork related to disability in this country, and by making just visual artworks, I'm really trying to change this story, and I'm trying to make people to see the real people behind all those papers and bureaucratic statements. What is really worrying is this attitude, the attitudes. We had a hate speech survey in 2018, and there they found that 50% of hate speech faced by people with disabilities comes from medical workers and 25% from other authorities. So we are a welfare state where we are too expensive if you ask people without disabilities. And it really affects the everyday life, and that's what I'm trying to change, that we have so much to give, not only to ask for.
There's so many wonderful things you said. First of all, I couldn't agree more. In America, and I bet in England it's the same, the prevalence of the medical model of looking at people, looking at their disability or looking at them as medical stories to unravel rather than as human beings who have independent spirit, souls. Yeah, that's a problem here too. And we say that as well. And you talk about, yes, there's people who will say, well, those people with disabilities are so expensive to provide those services. So I would, say that, but what is the cost of not providing those services? What are the losses to society? And first of all, beautiful art, which societies must be defined by more than their money and wealth. They must also be defined by their culture and their art. Either of you want to take off on that and how that has impacted you, those theories?
So certainly, I think with the kind of context that gave birth to Casual Terms was around observing how patronizing the public are towards the people that were they're the tutors of the art school. So the premise of the art school that we created together was that rather than have some body of knowledge dumped from a top down, education and art for me is most powerful when it's embracing and exploring how people innately are. So the idea was, how do you have a school that comes from how people innately are rather than how they should be, which I think is a great starting point for a community generally, and I think to sort of echo some of what Jenni-Juulia really beautifully spoke about, the way that disabled people are treated in the UK, and I imagine, as we're discussing, in other countries, reflects so much about how a wider culture works. This is not something on the side of, and so I think the main sort of thing that fired me up was seeing such patronizing responses to the artists I was working with, as though it is something that's an add-on, and a sort of attitude of, oh, well done you, completely missing the conversation and the conversations that were being enacted, catalyzed by such amazingly creative people who innately are anarchic. They are, every individual I worked with, was like an artistic dream. We're obsessed with this idea of the creative genius that's unique. And I was the blandest person. I was the blandest person in the art school, and so really the art school and then the film for me was about is a two-way communication. It's about tuning other people's ears to listen and helping them to see with clarity, you know. And yeah, when you kind of go to the bottom of the ocean with somebody who communicates in such a different way to the way you do, some incredibly beautiful, amazing, you know, landscapes open up that you would never have otherwise been alerted to or awoken to. So yeah, it's also about that immense creative power, you know, that that the creative people I worked with innately possessed, but also like when you mix people up, what happens when you mix people who don't usually get to mix, you know, very powerful things happen.
What about, you know, Jenni-Juulia, it's the same, you know, the question too, is there, you know, services are expensive, but if we don't do those services, there's a cost to that too, that we're forfeiting, as Morgan said, the talents and contributions of people with disabilities. Is that your view as well?
Yeah, definitely my view too. I think one of the problems here is the big rate of unemployment among people with disabilities, because the basic benefit gives you not good, but maybe a moderate life quality. And we have quite a lot of discrimination in working life. So we are not seeing us as people who can give back, who pay taxes to, who would love to work if there would be possibilities. We have plenty of highly educated, university studied people with disabilities who retire after their 20s because they just can't find work in an open market. So then they go to disability organizations to work. I think we should somehow like we should be seen in a total different way in this society. There's so many works that needs people to do. Our population is aging, and it's not coming from us that like people don't want to stay inside. This is a cold country, there's a long winter, people would like to participate in society, but because the benefits run, there's a lot of bureaucracy, there's not much to do, so people are spending time at home. And when I'm listening Morgan, I really hope that we would also have more kind of possibilities to do at least art together, or include people with disabilities more to the art field. We have quite strong lines that you need to be educated, you must be professional artists to receive fundings. Many galleries are not accepting like self-taught artists. Application processes are not accessible for all. So like it can be anything, doesn't have to be art, but even like voluntary work, something that we would be, people could see us more on the streets, in the working places, in events. But unfortunately, many people decide to stay home. Luckily, we have these online events now. The COVID has been maybe best thing for people with disabilities in Finland. We can finally like participate better.
So one thing about the kind of issue of money. So this this new poor law in 1834 that happened in the UK, which is when a lot of these big workhouses were being built, they had to start categorizing and organizing people. So the language of categorization is very much something that I think is kind of filtered through to systems we have today. So categorizing people based on how useful they are, these utilitarian ideas of usefulness and commerce. And in some ways, part of the film and the project was also about sort of making sure that visitors didn't slip into this comfortable position where it feels like everything that was bad was in the past. And today, because we have benefit system, we do have a benefit system, we do have a social care system that is more person-centered. Obviously, it's terrible and pockmarked and not complete, and doesn't take every individual within the context of their life and what they need. There are cuts. Austerity has led to so many cuts, but people can be deluded into thinking that, you know, the bad things happened in the past and today everything's okay. And I think language is really important, and the language that was used in the past, you know, this language filters through today in very powerful ways. So, you know, the term idiot was used as a category of working out in the workhouse in the past what job somebody should do. So I think in terms of money and opportunity, in a way, our liberalism here has actually made things less visible, and in some ways even harder to spot, because and that's why one of the many reasons why I respect your work so much, Jenni-Juulia, unless people are constantly banging the drum and saying, no, actually things haven't improved as much as they might seem, just because it seems like we're in a world of consumer choice doesn't mean we actually have choice that aggregates into real liberty. Actually, we inflict a deprivation on liberty in the present as much as we did in the past. And there's talk in the UK of the value of, say, social prescribing. So to go back to what you were saying, Jenni-Juulia, about creative opportunities for expression and connection, which help all human beings, you know, in terms of well-being and happiness. There are talks of including that more in doctors' surgeries, but it's always seen as to the side of, and you know, I would advocate that that's essential. That's an essential part of people's lives. You know, as much as sort of prescribed medicines, the opportunities to participate and to shape culture is really, really important.
You know, I'm going to return back to that, but I want to take a little pause here, and some of the questions or comments. I'm going to ask William. William, you had selected a film called Shooting Beauty a few years ago. And do you remember how that worked, where they were able to take the most basic of tools to places where there was essentially, you know, group homes or, you know, people with disabilities living in? And how did that, do you remember that one? Do you remember
that was about
William?
The artists with disabilities, correct?
Yes, and I think they gave them simple throwaway Kodak cameras, wasn't that it?
What happened initially was the artists came in and filmed people with disabilities making art. And the response from the audience was, oh, wow, these people are in such horrible positions. Look how miserable and awful they were. And the artist said, this is ridiculous. This is not what I'm trying to show. This is not the image I want to give. So what I need to do is put the art and the camera in the hands of the artists, and let the people with disabilities tell their own stories. Because people were not looking on the art as the art. They were perceiving the art on the basis of their perception of disability. And that's one of the thoughts that was going through my head, is a big problem that we have in this country, and apparently in England and Finland and throughout the world, is perception of disability. And people say, well, how could a person with a disability make art? That's not possible. How could you be a politician? You have a disability. So people are putting the people are thinking that individuals cannot create or be artists or live lives the same way as others because of the disability. So yeah, the point that film brought out is how perceptions, how people have preconceived notions about disability.
Mm. And I think a lot of those preconceived ideas, you know, relate to homogeneity. You know, we're not talking about one block. You know, I worked with nearly 200 individuals,
Right.
all completely different, all completely different. And that's where the creative power is. So it always seems bizarre to me that we are obsessed with this romantic notion of an artist being an outsider who can observe society, who, you know, operates with this autonomous creative genius. I think those ideas also are faulty. I think there's something called scenius, where people get together and create something that's even more powerful. But, you know, it seemed like a big contradiction to me that culturally we want to have these outsiders who are unique. And yet when it comes to, and it's not just within disability, I've worked in refugee camps, you know, when people are kind of packaged up in a group as though they're one entity, it denies, you know, the agency and the power of the individuals who are involved. And it seems very strange to me that within the arts that would happen within a context where it's always about the unique, the search for the new and the search for the unique. And there's, you know, immense power in kind of happening across that. And in those interactions.
I would say, you know, or perhaps, you know, there are always some individuals who are excellent artists who are labeled as savants, you know, the artistic savant, as if this is a unusual gift rather than an artistic talent that might cross many areas of the disability community. And is that a mislabel, like Jenni-Juulia, is that a mislabeling to say that if you have a disability and you have artistic talent, you're a savant, a member of a very small group of people who are able to produce art with a disability?
Yes, there is the superhero stories also here, the savant stories. What I think it can be also that it is so difficult to explain what these artists with disabilities are doing, and explaining, or especially like disability explaining what this artist is doing is a form of power from curators, from art historians. And what I really love about this scene is that, like, if we think about Judith Scott, for example, we can write about her life, where she worked and what she did, but then like nobody can explain where all this creativity comes, what she was thinking while she was doing her work. Mm-hmm. And this is somehow like difficult and maybe even threatening from some mainstream art people, that they cannot like explain where this creativity is coming from. They cannot interview the artist the same way. They cannot like write artistic descriptions about what is going on in their heads. So I see there this power issue, that when you can't explain, so then you don't know like where you're standing with the artist. Like, are you facing a genius, or are you like facing a self-thought, what is it called, like folk artist? And I always love when there is like mismatch with power. So maybe there is something. Well, that's what I've been thinking about. It's difficult for curators to pick up an artist with severe disability when you cannot like easily write what it's the work, what is going on, where it all comes from.
What do you think, Morgan? They're not really superheroes, are they? They're not really these tiny sections of society that are true savants. It's really can be just as broad. as in any segment of society, right? Artistic, creative talent.
Absolutely. I mean, I was nodding furiously when Jenni-Juulia was talking then. I think it is about controlling the narrative, and I think we shouldn't be deluded that artistic structures of power are separate. They are still structures of power.
Yes.
And also, you know, if art is about good communication, if it's about transference of empathy and evoking empathy, which I think art is, then those languages are very diverse. And you know, we in relation to so one of the children's homes I worked with, the children, young adults there are all neurodiverse. You know, that's a spectrum of human experience. We're all on that spectrum, and we're all on a spectrum of human experience generally. So it seems bizarre to me to kind of deconstruct the language of empathy and those connective bridges too much, because quite simply, when people are mixed up, if you're awake to what's happening and if you're open to a connection, then something very powerful will happen. That artistic, creative connection will happen. Whether it's with somebody who can support their work with a written essay, or whether that articulation comes through in other areas. It's about being sensitive to what's happening. And I think that's why the arts has so much value in shaping culture, because actually if everybody was more awake and more sensitive and sensitized towards human experience and empathy and different ways of communicating, you know, life would be a lot easier for many people. So yeah, I think I do relate.
So William, I know William. I was going to ask you to comment, because I know, see, William actually reviews every film that gets entered into our competition and narrows it down. And he has come to me sometimes and talked about some film that focuses on a superhero or savant, and says, yeah, maybe this isn't what the message should be. So Will, why don't you take off on that thought too?
You know, the thought that sparked is how people sometimes use disability to explain how someone is extraordinary. I mean, one of the more infuriating things I've seen is people saying, oh, Bill Gates must have some form of autism. Look at the way he talks. That explains why he could be such a genius at creating a computer company. And the same thing must be true for Steve Jobs. And what bothers me about that is that people use disability either to say that, disability is why this person is so extraordinary, or this person cannot do anything because he has a disability. And it is a nasty double-edged sword.
Yeah.
Because it promotes on the one hand and discriminates on the other hand, sometimes at the same time. And you know, in terms of like the superhero idea, in the films, I don't like it very much. Sometimes it works out pretty well. There are some comic books that have superheroes with disabilities, and that doesn't bother me because they're talking about comics and fantasy. And if you want to go in that direction, or science fiction, fine, you can do that. But when people talk about individuals in contemporary society who are somehow superheroes because of how they compensate for their disability, I think that is another form of discrimination. That's another way of looking at the disability rather than the person.
So would you say, and I'll ask this to all three of you, would you say that none of these superheroes were actually trying to be superheroes? They were just trying to go toward perhaps their own self-expression to the extent. Start with you, William. Nobody wanted to be the superhero, even if other people called them that. Is that right?
In the best cases, yes. And when you see a bad film or a bad representation or bad interpretation, it's saying, oh, and the disability made this person a superhero. But the things that I like best are when people are seen as being, oh, wow, amazing or heroic, because look what this person with a disability is doing. When the person is just acting the way anyone else would, regardless of his or her disability.
So Jenni-Juulia, are they trying to be superheroes, or are they just trying to maximize their self-expression?
Well, I don't believe to these superhero stories. Even I'm also reading them from almost every new, even from disability magazines here, you can read the superhero stories. But I must personally, I hate the way to talk about like how we do things despite of our disabilities or after overcoming everyday stuff. Personally, I have been called a superhero because I've been able to do art professional. I'm able to do professionally my artwork, but like the funny thing is that, for example, my textile art colleagues tell me that, oh, you can make so much slow embroidery because you live with a disability, so you must have so much more time than others do. And I'm trying to explain that, hey, come on, I have 2 kids on a disability. I don't have time. That's I'm definitely lacking time, but I'm just spending every moment best possible way. The heroic stories, I think the biggest danger in here is that like sometimes okay, I'm 3rd generation with my disability, so I didn't get at home any kind of talks that like good, oh, you clean your room, wonderful, like it would be something special. But I have met, when I have worked in a disability organizations, many young people who are the only ones in their family and who never received like a normal critic for what they're doing, because they have been treated as heroes when they wake up and when they brush their teeth and when they get dressed themselves. And I think it's not their fault. I think it's a very the parents of people with disabilities should be educated first, like so that we don't also create people who believe that they are like so good in everything because they have a disability and they only get positive feedback from. I called it discrimination framed as kindness, when you never say anything like negative. That's my translation. Sorry, but I hope you get the point. So being a hero is dangerous. It's dangerous for other people with disabilities to hear the hero stories, but it's also dangerous if you are called a hero, because like it's often just like wrong kind of kindness, which is not doing anything good for you.
Morgan?
Yeah, I'm just so interested to learn both of your perspectives on this. And I don't think I have anything to say that's different other than, you know, we have a structurally unfair system and a lot of meritocratic ideas that say, you know, that try and disguise the structural inequalities, you know, for example, here, wealth, inequality of wealth, inequality of opportunity, you know, inequitable access to opportunity. And in a meritocratic system, you have poster children that are supposed to represent, you know, what can be, and somehow delude us and make us forget about the real reasons why it's such a battle and it's such an unfair situation for almost everyone. And so I think to kind of go back to sort of what William was saying about that other film that sounds amazing, and what's one of the many things that's so compelling for me about Jenni-Juulia's work, and what you know, was very much in my mind throughout the whole project and the making of Casual Terms, is how important self-representation is.
Mhm.
And how shifting that narrative, and to borrow Jenni-Juulia again, to sort of take back control of that narrative. And in my case, that's the job is to co-create the platform for the self-representation. You know, not for me to kind of dive in and try and own it, but to learn from people's experiences and share that platform is really important. Yeah. And it's a fine balance, isn't it? Because you know, Tyrone in the film, in Casual Terms, I mean, he's a totemic figure because he's such an engaging artist. But you know, hopefully he tells his story and the context of his life in a way that you know, that makes people think about the structures that have prevented him to be seen as an artist before, and think about that in a new way. Yeah. So yeah, I totally agree. Being a hero is very alienating as well.
This has been an absolutely fascinating conversation. I'm so glad to have met both of you. Of course, we've known William forever. But,
Well,
so
you know,
we're oh, you have William's got a point he wants to make. Okay, William, shoot.
actually, something comes to mind. This goes back 9 years ago when I was in the San Francisco Marathon. I was running along at one point. There was just one other runner there. And she said, "Oh, geez, is that a buffalo off in the distance?" And I told her, "Well, I don't know. I can't tell because I'm legally blind." And she said, "No, you're not." Well, yes, I am. And then she stopped for a second and said, "Wow, you're doing pretty well then." And so it's like, well, you can't be running this if you're blind. Oh, well, if you are blind, then you're doing pretty well considering your disabilities. Look at the person as another runner, not as someone with a disability. And that is just what you see constantly.
That's a great story, Will. That's a really great story. I guess I never thought about that. I've known you as a marathon runner for so long. But winding this down, I'm going to ask each of our filmmaker guests here, you know, what's next? What's next? What do you got on the back burner? Jenni-Juulia, what do you got on the back burner? That's an American, by the way, that's an American expression. It's what are you working on elsewhere?
Well, I'm sort of very fascinated about these space flights recently. Even I know that it's a very exclusive traveling, but I love the terms like final frontier, because I'm thinking about stairs and accessibility, and then I love the idea that maybe it's not this globe, but it can be the space that is finally the fully accessible equal place for us. Of course, there's a huge money issue. I know about the Amazon workers and everything, so there's a lot of conflict between this, but I'm recently been thinking about the space as a place for all mankind, and I definitely mean all, like all kind of people. What I can at this point tell that my next big project is that I'm actually coming to North America. I'm going to have a 4 months residency next year in Canada. in Toronto, and I'm going to have a solo at Harbourfront Center. And I have never been in Canada before, so I'm packing and preparing for that. And I'm hoping that my English is going to be a bit better after that 4 months. But I'm going to learn a lot. And as a disabled person, I'm 47 years old, and it's my first residency ever. So it's about a time. And I hope it's accessible and so on. So that's what I'm waiting a lot.
Fantastic. How about you, Morgan? What's next?
Oh, I'm just blown away by hearing that. That was amazing. And I'm sure you're going to teach the people hosting the residency an awful lot, Jenni-Juulia, an awful lot. And if it isn't accessible, I'm sure it very quickly will need to be. So good for you. So I'm a hybrid artist because I've worked in social care for many years. So I've worked throughout the pandemic as both a carer and a support worker, which I enjoy very much. So I continue to learn every day in collaboration with the people, the children, the young adults that I work with. And I'm in conversation with Bristol University, where we've got a little bit of funding to do co-create some work with children, young adults with lived experience of care, to imagine care in the future and how they might want it to be.
Fabulous stuff. And finally, I would say that we do all this stuff for no charge for anyone watching here or who may come to the theater. And, how on earth do we ever do this without ever charging anybody? Well, we go out and get corporate sponsors and to do that. And one of the ways we thank them is to let our viewers know who they are. And starting on the entry level is the Texas Association of Interior Design. Moving up to the next level, Cigna, the managed care organization. Then what we call the leading cast level upstream technology, which is adaptive technology training. Hart InterCivic, which produces adaptive voting machines. At the producer level, the next higher level at the highest level are three major sponsors at the moment. Genentech, which has produced some of the most cutting edge pharmaceutical treatments in recent years. Well, actually recent decades, but also in recent years. Then Superior Health Plan and United Healthcare, both of whom coordinate services to, literally hundreds of thousands of Texans with disabilities in the Medicaid program.